June 17, 1957, 11:28 p.m. Joey the Blade Santoro's hands were steady when he raised the .45. 5 years of collections and enforcement work had trained the shake out of him. Through the Packard's half-open window, he could see Bumpy Johnson's silhouette moving toward a Lincoln Continental parked 30 feet down Lenox Avenue. The street was empty. Perfect conditions. Joey's partner, Vincent, kept muttering, clean shot," under his breath like a prayer. Behind them, Rizzo had already mapped their escape route, left on 141st straight through to the Bronx, ditching the car in Paulie's cousin's garage by midnight. Then the front doors of the Savoy Ballroom opened again, and what came out wasn't a person. It was a tide. 50 people, then 100, then more, flooding onto that sidewalk like someone had pulled a fire alarm, except nobody was running and nobody was screaming. They just stood there, filling every inch of space between Joey's gun and Bumpy's back. Was this Harlem protecting its king, or was this Bumpy Johnson's most brilliant trick? The thing about assassination attempts in 1957 is that they usually worked. You picked your target, you picked your moment, you pulled the trigger. Simple math. Joey Santoro had done the research. Bumpy Johnson left the Savoy every Monday at 11:30, walked alone to his car, drove home. Patterns meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant opportunity. Except Joey didn't know he was researching the wrong thing. Frank Costello was dying slowly, which made him dangerous. Not physically dying, though the bullet Vincent Gigante had put in his head a month earlier had come close, but dying in terms of power. When you survive an assassination attempt from your own family, you don't get stronger. You get marked. Everyone knows you're wounded. Everyone starts circling. Costello needed a win, something big enough to remind New York that he still mattered. That's when Bumpy Johnson's name came up at a sit-down in early June. Some business about Harlem's numbers racket, about territories, about respect. The details don't matter as much as the conclusion. Costello put $75,000 on Bumpy's head and assigned it to Joey's crew. Joey didn't want it. You could see it in how he held the assignment paper, like it might catch fire. His crew, Vincent Esposito, Rizzo, Paulie DeMarco, they were solid earners. They collected debts, managed protection routes through Little Italy, handled disputes. But they weren't hitters. Not really. Breaking someone's leg sent a message. Killing Bumpy Johnson in the middle of Harlem? That was something else entirely. "This is a bad idea," Tommy had said when they met to discuss it. "Bumpy's connected. He's got the whole neighborhood." "Costello's got the whole city," Vincent countered. "What's Bumpy got? Some street loyalty? That doesn't stop bullets." Joey hadn't said anything. He was doing math. 75,000 split 4 ways. His daughter needed braces. His mother's nursing home cost $800 a month. Vincent's math was simpler. Refuse Costello, get demoted or worse. Tommy's math was the most honest. They were probably going to die either way, might as well get paid for it. So they started surveillance. Bumpy Johnson was 52 years old in 1957, and he moved through Harlem like he owned it. Not in the way bosses usually own territory, with muscle and fear, but like a man who'd invested in every block. He'd paid rent for families, funded community centers, made problems disappear when the police wouldn't help. People didn't just fear Bumpy. They respected him. Sometimes they even loved him. But respect doesn't stop surveillance. Joey's crew spent 2 weeks tracking Bumpy's movements, and what they found was almost disappointing. Bumpy had routines: Monday nights at the Savoy Ballroom, Wednesday lunches at Wells Restaurant, Friday evenings at Lenox Lounge. For a man as smart as his reputation suggested, he was predictable. "He wants us to see the patterns," Tommy said during one of their debriefings. "Or he's just old," Vincent replied. "Old men get comfortable. They forget people want them dead." Joey stayed quiet, but Tommy's comment stuck with him. What if Bumpy was showing them patterns on purpose? What if the predictability was the trap? But that kind of thinking led nowhere. They had a job. They needed to do it. The Savoy made the most sense. Public enough that Bumpy wouldn't have his full security detail. Isolated enough that they'd have a clean shot when he walked to his car. They picked Monday, June 17th. Joey would take the shot. Vincent would watch the entrance. Tommy would handle the police radio they'd stolen. Paulie would drive. Simple plan. Nothing complicated. In and out in under 2 minutes. The Savoy was electric that night. Count Basie's orchestra was playing and the dance floor was packed with 400 people doing the Lindy Hop. Bumpy sat at his usual table on the second floor talking business with Illinois Gordon and Mouse Williams. From Joey's position across the street, Bumpy looked relaxed, comfortable, vulnerable. At 11:15, Joey's crew pulled up in the Packard. They parked with a clear sight line to both the Savoy's entrance and Bumpy's Lincoln. Tommy turned on the police radio. Nothing unusual, just regular patrol chatter. Vincent checked his backup piece, a .38 snub-nose. Paulie kept the engine running. Everything was ready. That's when Jerome Washington noticed them. Jerome was a shoe-shine man who'd worked the corner outside the Savoy for 6 years. He knew every car in the neighborhood, every face, every rhythm. 4 white men in an Italian car sitting outside a Harlem jazz club after 11 p.m. That registered immediately as wrong. Not threatening necessarily, but wrong enough that Jerome mentioned it to Richard "Quick" Johnson, a cab driver who was parked nearby waiting for fares. Quick looked over at the Packard, looked back at Jerome. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Somebody should know," Jerome said. Quick didn't waste time. He walked into the Savoy through the side entrance and found Samuel Davis tending bar. Leaned in close. 4 Italian guys outside, been sitting there 20 minutes just watching. Samuel didn't ask for details. He walked upstairs, approached Bumpy's table, and whispered something in his ear. What happened next depends on who's telling the story. Some people say Bumpy's face never changed, that he just nodded and kept talking like Samuel had told him about the weather. Others say Bumpy's jaw tightened for just a second before he relaxed it. Everyone agrees on what he did, though. He finished his drink, stood up, and told Illinois and Mouse he was leaving early. "Want us to walk out with you?" Illinois asked. "Stay. Enjoy the music. I'll see you tomorrow." That was unusual. Bumpy never walked alone. But when Bumpy gave an order, you followed it. At 11:28, Bumpy pushed through the Savoy's front doors. Joey saw Bumpy step onto the sidewalk and felt his pulse spike. This was it. Bumpy started walking toward his car, slow, unhurried, hands in his pockets. Joey raised the .45, found his sight picture. Bumpy was 40 feet away. 35, 30. Then the doors opened again. Not dramatically, not all at once, just people started coming out. A couple first, lighting cigarettes, then a group of 5, then more and more. They weren't running, they weren't panicking. They were just there, suddenly filling the sidewalk, standing between the Packard and Bumpy Johnson's car. "What the hell?" Vincent whispered. Joey kept the gun raised, but his target had disappeared into a crowd that kept growing. 20 people, 50, 100. Within 90 seconds, Lenox Avenue looked like the Savoy had emptied out, except the music was still playing inside. You could hear Count Basie's orchestra through the open windows. Jerome was suddenly right next to the Packard's front bumper, polishing someone's shoes. Quick was at his taxi, taking his time opening the trunk. Samuel was on the sidewalk, smoking a cigarette, standing exactly where Joey would need to aim to hit Bumpy's car. "We can't shoot," Tommy said from the back seat. "We'd have to shoot through 20 people." "Wait for them to clear," Joey replied, but his voice had lost certainty. They didn't clear. The crowd kept growing. 200 people now, maybe more, and they weren't doing anything threatening. They were just there, talking, smoking, standing, making it impossible to see where Bumpy had gone. Vincent's knee was bouncing against the dashboard again. This is wrong. This is all wrong. Joey lowered the gun. He understood. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Somehow Harlem had known, or Harlem had guessed, or Harlem had just decided that 4 Italian guys in a Packard weren't taking one of their own tonight. Drive, Joey said quietly. Costello's gonna... Vincent started. Drive. Paulie pulled away from the curb, and as they rolled down Lenox Avenue, people turned to watch. Not hostile, not aggressive, just watching, making sure they were leaving. Some people swear that as the Packard reached the corner, Bumpy Johnson stepped out from behind his Lincoln, that he stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets and watched them go, that he nodded once like he was saying thank you or goodbye or we'll do this again sometime. Other people say that's myth, that Bumpy was already in his car by then, driving home, never even knowing how close he'd come. The truth probably doesn't matter as much as what people believed happened. And what people believed was that Harlem had formed a human shield around Bumpy Johnson without him even asking for it. 2 days later, Joey sat across from Frank Costello in a social club in Little Italy. Costello was 70 pounds lighter than he'd been 6 months ago. The assassination attempt and the stress of Vito Genovese's power grab had hollowed him out. He looked at Joey with eyes that had seen too much and said, "You had him." "There were 200 people," Joey replied. "They came out of nowhere. We would have been shooting through crowds." Costello stared for a long time. Then he said something that Joey would repeat for years afterward. "You can't kill a man when an entire neighborhood decides he's not dying tonight." Joey and his crew were demoted, moved to dock work, stripped of their good roots and their respect. But they lived, and that counted for something. Frank Costello never put another contract on Bumpy Johnson. Within a year, he'd stepped down as boss. Here's what we don't know about that night. Did Bumpy orchestrate it? Samuel Davis said until the day he died that all he did was tell a few people about the suspicious car. That word spread naturally through the club, that people made their own choices to walk outside, to stand on that sidewalk, to protect Bumpy. Others claim there's no way that level of coordination happens by accident. They say Bumpy must have known about the hit for days, must have prepared the crowd, must have staged the whole thing as a demonstration of power. The truth might be simpler and stranger than either version. Maybe Bumpy suspected something was coming. He'd survived too long not to have good instincts. Maybe he'd mentioned it to a few people casually, the way you might mention bad weather coming. And maybe Harlem did the rest on its own. Because here's what people miss when they tell this story. Bumpy had spent years building relationships in that neighborhood. He'd paid rent when people couldn't. He'd protected businesses from outside predators. He'd been present in ways that mattered. So when 4 Italian guys showed up in a Packard outside the Savoy, when word started spreading that something might be about to happen, maybe people didn't need to be told what to do. Maybe they just did it. The legend of that night is about Bumpy's invincibility, about how you couldn't kill him because he always saw it coming, always had a plan, always controlled every variable. And there's some truth to that. Bumpy was brilliant at reading situations, at staying 3 moves ahead. But the deeper truth is different. The reason Joey Santoro drove away that night wasn't because Bumpy had outsmarted him. It was because the cost of succeeding was too high. Shooting Bumpy would mean shooting through crowds. It would mean witnesses. It would mean war with an entire community, not just one man. That's the real power on display, not individual genius, but collective protection. Not one man being untouchable, but 400 people deciding that tonight he wouldn't be touched. Joey Santoro had a gun, training, a plan, and 75,000 reasons to pull the trigger. But he didn't have what Bumpy had, a neighborhood that would walk out of a ballroom and stand in the way. Bumpy Johnson lived another 11 years after that night. He survived more attempts, more contracts, more threats. When he finally died in 1968, it wasn't from a bullet. It was from a heart attack at Wells Restaurant, surrounded by people who'd known him for decades. The story of June 17, 1957 became legend. People told it for years, passed it down, added details, subtracted others. It became less about what actually happened and more about what it meant. That in Harlem, power didn't just flow down from the top. Sometimes it rose up from the bottom. Sometimes 400 people made individual choices that added up to something larger than any of them could do alone. Was it organized? Was it spontaneous? Did Bumpy plan it, or did it just happen? Maybe those are the wrong questions. Maybe the right question is, what kind of man builds relationships strong enough that when danger comes, people choose to stand between him and the bullets? That's the question Joey Santoro couldn't answer. That's the question Frank Costello never figured out. And that's why, when people tell stories about Bumpy Johnson, they're not just talking about a gangster who was good at surviving. They're talking about someone who understood that the most dangerous thing you can do to a powerful person isn't threaten them. It's earn the loyalty of everyone around them. Look, I don't know if every detail of this story is exactly how it happened. Nobody does. The people who were there are mostly gone, and the ones who are left tell different versions. But the core truth remains. Bumpy Johnson was supposed to die that night, and Harlem changed the ending.